That title was not entirely clickbait, but I will preface this with the fact that I am aware some people may have picked it up along the way and that this kind of influence was happening in your lives, but the fact of the matter remains. No matter how old you are, no matter how switched on and aware you think you are still being impacted by propaganda, and you have definitely been impacted at least by one point by propaganda in your youth. Most likely, in the modern era, and this is directed specifically at young people, young men in particular, it is Russian propaganda. Don't believe me? Have a look at what the youth, and I say youth as if I'm an old grey 563-year-old, but I'm 26 and my spine is just starting to hurt. But have a look at what is showing up now on TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. Yes, that is the song Sigma Boy, created by the Russian state complete with epic sound effects and military aesthetics to appeal to a younger audience in its own language. This kind of thing is not new. There's a reason the game War Thunder exists and is so popular. No, I will never accept a sponsorship by them. Okay, so some backstory on who I am, because I have a feeling this video might touch people who don't know me, and their first response will be a case of how dare you talk about things you don't understand, silly YouTube, Anglo-Western, Westoid, idiot, gay man, whatever. It'll be some kind of slur and insult, followed by something probably either anti-Semitic, or maybe just calling me a communist. It'll be one of the two things, or woke. I'm paraphrasing, the comments will happen though. Feel free to enjoy them, they're great entertainment. But I'm in my late 20s. I'm a major in modern European history, with a focus on the evolution of national identity and statehood, mostly within Eastern Europe. Technically, you'd call me a Slavicist in terms of the way that I study history, because I do focus a lot of my study on Slavic history. For my passion, I study naval history, I build lots of scale models, and that includes Warhammer. Yes, I have a plastic crack addiction. In particular, though, my studies focus on the G-word studies, Ukraine, also Belarus and their national identities and histories. My postgraduate study is likely going to be focused on G-words ending in sides. Have to be careful with YouTube. How and why they occur, what triggers them, and what leads general populaces to support them even tacitly. My presence on YouTube stems from the fact my career in finance was soul-sucking, and when I got a chance I left and made my own job because YouTube is a great place for me to spread the things I've spent many years studying to a wider audience. So why am I saying this? Because it's to actually tell you, I'm qualified to talk about what I talk about next. It's not a case of just another internet person shouting at you. This is genuinely something I am qualified in, and it is something I study in depth. Not that that will matter. Enjoy the show in the comments below. Okay, to start with, this is going to be a really long video. So, grab a cup of tea, coffee, whatever you want to put into it. I will not blame you for how long you're going to be sitting here, but I will make sure to include breaks so you can take in the amount of information I'll be absolutely paddling over. To start with, we need to go back in time quite far, but quite often Russian propaganda happens without you even realizing it. This is particularly true regarding people in my age group. See, for us, early Zoomers, late millennials, our childhood holds fun memories of games like Call of Duty World at War and Call of Duty Modern Warfare. The good Modern Warfare, not whatever this is. These games have given us amazing memories, with lines that still resonate in our heads today, be it the infamous Bonsai from Okinawa in World at War that still lives in my head rent-free and still gives me chills from when I first played it, or 50,000 people used to live here in the Chernobyl missions during Modern Warfare. That last one actually, it's so built into our brains and so common that in 2024 when I visited Pripyat with Laserpig and went into the Palace of Culture, it was all I could think about. And if you ask Laserpig, we were quoting Modern Warfare quite a lot when we were in Chernobyl, and so were the soldiers there in the Ukrainian special forces that we were with, because they knew it. It was in their culture. It is in your brain and in your culture. It is our age group. It's things we know and things we understand. So the whole time we were there with the soldiers, we were quoting things like Captain Price and, well, dodging landmines, but I digress. See, these things, whether you realize it or not, are propagandized accounts of history, designed to make you feel in a certain way about a certain event. I'm picking on Call of Duty here because I want to show you something that resonates with my audience, the majority of you being between ages 25 to 35, so you will recognize this. But make no mistake, these ideas have been in practice for far longer than you may realize with all forms of media, be it digital or print. Your parents got this too. And if you don't believe me and you think I'm talking out of my proverbial, sure. Okay, but I want you to consider a few things. How many online accounts push the fact that Russia could conquer its way all the way to the Atlantic if they actually tried? Because I can go on Facebook or that hellscape that is Twitter and find examples freely saying Russia isn't even trying, that if they want they could make Europe tremble. See, these are lines that are beneficial directly to the Kremlin and are often parroted by Russian state media. But would you believe that you also had them beamed into your brain as a child when you played Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and the Russians did conquer their way to the Atlantic? Because you did. In this game, Russian people, outraged by the American attack on innocent people in Russia, launched an all-out invasion of Europe and the United States, destroying everyone from Minsk to Paris and capturing the US eastern seaboard. The poor victims, the Russian people, always the victims, sitting there doing absolutely nothing, being attacked for no reason at all by the decadent evil West, all of it being a big plot in the end by the deep state to make war happen. See, this was considered a far-fetched, albeit good video game plot a few decades ago, but now, well, you have people like the President of the United States publicly blaming the war in Ukraine on the previous administrations, who were dominated by the so-called deep state. We have the so-called innocent Russia just defending itself, the poor Russia, and of course we have them not even trying. It's all a bit convenient. And I've seen the joke made that we are living in the plot of the first Modern Warfare game a few times. What is in reality is the plot of the first Modern Warfare game just highlights a few things that we have lived with for decades. Now, I'm not saying the Infinity Ward devs created the Modern Warfare series as an attempt to parrot Russian propaganda. Not at all. The Call of Duty games are violently full of American propaganda, but that's another topic. It is my personal hypothesis that they themselves, the devs, had fallen victim to it, and they, through writings and through cinema, going back into their childhood, because like I said, this idea of an uber mega strong Kremlin and Russia, it is not something modern. This is just a modern example of it. This is propaganda without even trying. See, if we go back further to when these Infinity Ward devs would have grown up and what kind of media they would have been exposed to, well, it would have been things like the Tom Clancy series. Now, Tom Clancy and his contemporaries, later his son, regularly depict the USSR and later adaptations depict Russia as an incredibly powerful state that can and would wipe out Europe and even the United States. For example, at the beginning of the Hunt for Red October, which, by the way, amazing book, the Soviet fleet puts to sea chasing the defecting submarine at full speed. Clancy makes it very clear in this book that the Soviet Navy and its Kiev-class aircraft carriers and submarines was so powerful it could wipe out any defences the US had in the Atlantic. Now, this is just flat out not true. The Royal Navy, along with the United States Navy, at any time in history in this period would have never lost to the Soviet surface fleet. And as for the subs, well, the Soviet ones would do damage, but at the end of the day, they weren't winning. Now, yes, this is just two examples of media depicting Russia or the Soviet Union as all-powerful with an unbreakable will against the odds, but there are many more. Let's have a look in the modern adaptation of the Jack Ryan series in Season 3, which is set predominantly in the Czech Republic. There are lines in that such as, in the Russian Ministry of Defense that is, that we will position an S-400 system near the border of Ukraine, which it's assumed they've already conquered, as a way to destroy anything NATO can send up because nothing can destroy an S-400. This is where I cut to the video of the cheap drone blowing an S-400 up in Crimea that came out way before the show aired, but I can't show that because YouTube would get very upset at me, because it would show people dying. People died. The S-400 was blown up by a crappy little drone. But you see what I mean? It's this idea and this parroting of the line that the S-400 is the most powerful thing ever made, that Russia is unbreakable, that it cannot be destroyed. But the thing is, Like with Infinity Ward, these examples of propaganda occur without anybody realizing. And that brings us to the whole other point. What do I even mean by Russian propaganda? How does this propaganda happen? What even is propaganda? Also, girls, if you think you are getting out of this, like all three of you that watch me, the movie Anastasia is nothing more than a glazing of how amazing the Tsardom apparently was. The introduction to that movie is absolutely insane, and I cannot say enough just how many women I have met who love Anastasia and Disney movies and such, who genuinely thought the Tsardom was a nice, happy place and that the Soviets came and ruined everything. No, it was terrible before, it was terrible after, and it's still terrible. Anastasia is nothing more than a glazed up propaganda piece for the Tsardom, but there's a lot more to do with Anastasia. That goes into the Cold War and politics around it, so we'll get into that another day. I'll probably do a video on the movie Anastasia eventually, mostly because my wife used to love it until I pointed all these things out to her, and she still does like it, but understands the problems with it. But girls, you are not out of this. It's not just boys who cop this. Girls, you get it too. I'm aware that girls play Call of Duty as well, but it's targeted at young men. It absolutely is. Anyway, I'm babbling. Do you like freedom? Do you? Because I like freedom. And you know what helps with freedom? Cars. Cars help with freedom. Particularly cars that can be modified in such ways that the Top Gear guys would be very impressed by. And for that reason, I'm assisting with the summer initiative to raise funds through Car for Ukraine. Now, it's our goal to raise 11,000 euros. Now, I know that's a lot, so I don't expect us to hit it. I just hope we have a fair crack over the next 8 or so weeks to go towards a car for Ukraine. Now, there will be some incentives along the way that I will announce with upcoming videos, including weeks where the top donation will get something free from my merch store. Watch out for those donations. Or also a couple of other things that I may have in the works, including a large live stream, which I'm semi-planning off the top of my head. Now, there are some initiatives, though, to get you donating already. So anyone who donates 100 euros will get a special pin with my logo on the little card and the pin itself. Now, these kinds of vehicles, they go to places like Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, Liman, Kherson, all these places that you've seen in the news. Cars like this get sent to. So you will actually be able to make a tangible impact on the war for the good guys. If you want a collectible patch, well, you can get that too for everyone who contributes 100 euros or about 110 US as well. For the first 50 who donate 250 euros or $275 or more, they'll be able to receive a special signed patch from the unit. Now, this is 50 patches across 8 different donation schemes, so you've got to get in really quick to get these. If you want that, don't wait. And lastly, if you spend 2,500 euros, you'll be able to brand a truck on one side with whatever you want. Your logo, name, country's flag, whatever you want. It will be your truck effectively, and you'll get updates on the truck, what it's up to, and effectively what it's doing in the war. These trucks are so important. So important. I can't stress enough for Kazivac, for support, for the men. It genuinely saves lives. These trucks save lives. I've seen just how important they are in person. Pin link in the comments and in the description. Can't thank you enough to everyone who's already donated and those who will donate. Back to the video. To put it simply, Russian propaganda is an attempt by the Russian state to promote its version of events above all others in order to benefit the Russian state's leadership or the goals of the Russian state. Now, the examples we are going to be discussing here are going to be examples of not necessarily Russia making the propaganda, because the best kind of propaganda is not propaganda you make yourself. It is the truth that you twist, bend, and then force into the way you want it to be received. The greatest example of this is if you look at 2 different articles on the same event throughout history or the same news event. Given that it's topical, I want you to look at Pakistani and Indian articles for further clarification if you want to look at examples of propaganda. Pakistan and India are at each other's throats as the time of this recording, the 13th of the 5th. In fact, they've just signed a peace deal, touch wood that it stays. Well, a ceasefire. Now, If you look at each other side's articles, they are completely different warpings of the same event. They have the same bones, but the body and the structure around them is completely different. The best and most effective kind of propaganda, and the kind of propaganda that Russia relies on and uses explicitly non-stop, China does this too, is the kind of propaganda that there is truth in the base, and then from that base, the tree of lies grows. So how does Russian propaganda come in 2025? How does it manifest itself? It of course begins with none other than state control of media. Now within Russia itself, the Russian government controls a large portion of the media landscape, pretty much all of it, including television, radio, and print outlets. This allows for widespread dissemination of propaganda messages and is commonly done through major news sources such as RT, Russia Today, or TASS. This is done explicitly inside Russia, but also through the blogger communities or military blogger communities. These blogging communities, they're not as popular now because, well, they had a bit of a hammer put on their head during the war in Ukraine, but they are an important tool in disseminating false narratives and messages that the state and the military wants to the people within Russia itself. More commonly in the West now, though, Russia has moved on from print media largely. It still has an impact, mind you, it's a massive impact. But most of the propaganda that Russia disseminates in the West is done by useful idiots. Now, what do I mean by a useful idiot? They're also known as an agent of influence, but we'll get into that later. Well, that refers to people like this guy, who are willing to shell out for a narrative because it gets you clicks. It really doesn't matter to the Kremlin if he believes half the things he is saying, so long as he keeps talking. On a more sinister note, Russia has been proven to be behind the funding of influencers such as Tim Pool, David Rubin, and Benny Johnson, amongst others, through the funneling of money directly into their media companies in order to push Russian propaganda to a wider audience. I should cover myself here and claim that Pool and the others have claimed they were tricked into doing it, which in my opinion makes them exceptionally stupid for taking the money, believing that everything was kosher, and that there was in fact such things as a free lunch in politics. So take your pick on Tim Pool. He is either exceptionally stupid, downright just a bad person, or blatantly evil. But why, you may ask, why pay for influencers when they have all of these media sources, when they own RT, when they have massive inroads in Western newspapers? Because when the oligarchs went abroad, they started buying everything. Hell, the oligarchs in Russia had a Formula One team for a while there. They bought everything. And that comes down to who Russia is targeting, because it isn't just the baby boomers who watch TV. Oh no, it's the youth. And in particular, to reach the youth, you have to use the media the youth uses, and that's social media and YouTube. It is also worth noting that Russia will go out of its way to amend websites such as Wikipedia to remove competing opinions. This will tie well into our next point, but when I say that they go for influencers, and I bring up Tim Pool and his media company as an example, I'm not just referring to far-right influencers. They also flat out go for far-left influencers, and Russia will actively support any contrarian opinion because conflict to them in the Western nation is beneficial. So, if you think, oh, I'm not going to support Ukraine because it's not the communist thing to do because so-and-so influencer told me, you are still just as much of a useful idiot as the guy who says we need to deport all brown people because so-and-so told me so. You are still just as stupid. You are still just falling for the same kind of propaganda. It's just being dished to you in a different way. You are becoming a useful idiot. That brings us to the next point, the use of disinformation. Russian propaganda often relies on spreading false or misleading information to manipulate public opinion. Now, this is true of all propaganda, but we're focusing on Russia here, both domestically and internationally. Now, this can be through many avenues. Most commonly, it is how an event is reported. Before 2022, this was a little harder to spot, but good God above, it's gotten really easy to spot. Let's have a look at the strike on hospitals in Kyiv last year. Russia realized very quickly that it screwed up by doing this, and so a campaign began to discredit Ukrainian claims that Russia had in fact struck a literal cancer hospital. Now, the key to a Russian misinformation campaign and spotting it is not to look for one competing narrative, it's to look for all of them. Before Ukraine even came out with the numbers or information on the extent of the damage, the claim went out that it was a military target. this was quickly forced through the official Telegram channels, and then it hit the unofficial Telegram channels, then Twitter, then Kiwi Farms. By the way, love you guys at Kiwi Farms for your thread on me. Great read with a glass of wine. Reddit, and so forth. So boom, one narrative out. By the time you see it on Twitter, it's already a day or two old. This was then followed by the narrative that Ukraine hit their own hospital, but it was rushed and sloppy. With some of the images, they didn't even bother to edit out the distinctive markings on the weapon caught on film that would show it was Russian. But that's two narratives. When the mistake of the second was realised, suddenly the image was fake. That's three. And then finally, the fourth, there was no attack, Ukraine is lying. That gives you 5 total truths, including the official Ukrainian casualty report and the official report from Ukraine. Now obviously Ukraine did not tell the entire truth here, because it is simply not possible to report information accurately following an event such as this without a full investigation, and they can take months. Their priority was getting people out of the hospital. So, the moment they get something wrong in a report, it's all just fake news, right? And that is how misinformation campaigns work. Flood the narrative space, dominate the news headlines, and then discredit the truth, because the truth in fluid events such as this takes time. Russia does this non-stop. It's why people still believe the cruise of Moskva sank in a storm, despite all evidence to the contrary, including literal images of the ship in still water and weather reports from the Black Sea on this specific day. If you rewrite the story as it happens, you confuse and control the narrative. You split the opposition and you win. That's why it's so vital to take a step back from emotion and think in these situations. I recommend using a who, what, when, where, why approach to how you and when you see a headline. Who benefits from the narrative? What are the basics of the event? When did it occur? Where did it occur? Why are people saying it occurred differently, and what do they have to gain by saying it happened differently? And the biggest one, how did it happen? Figure this out and you'll likely get some semblance of the truth, but that is all in the present. What about the past? Because the past is really important at controlling the narrative. Now, you have all seen the absolute insanity that was the Tucker Carlson Putin interview, right? Hell, it became such a meme watching Putin attempt to explain Russian statehood without admitting Muscovy and Kiev diverged on their path in 1200 and never really returned. But if you ask a Russian today how their country formed, they will tell you that Muscovy was the real successor of the Great Rus, and that the Russian people today are the true Rus. That Ukrainians were simply backward, silly people misled by the evil West from the ways of the Rus, and that they belong back in the fold once re-educated as great Russians. This belief is genuine. I've seen it in person. Now, I've been working on an ongoing series about the history of Ukraine, so I won't dive entirely into it here. But the Russian textbooks completely hide the fact that Ukraine as a nation-state took a very different journey from the time of the 1200 AD Mongol sack of Kiev to the modern day, that it developed separately culturally and religiously to form its own language, its own way of life, its own belief system. This great big lie, though, that Ukraine isn't a real country has been force-fed to people for decades. Now, you may have heard the term "the Ukraine" used to describe the nation. This is an attempt to discredit the nationhood and the national consciousness of the Ukrainian people by referring to them as not Ukrainians, but as Russians who live in a region called the Ukraine, inferring it to be rightfully Russian. This isn't something that has fallen out of favour either, because modern politicians and political pundits do refer to Ukraine as just a wayward part of Russia. In fact, it was Russian policy for 3 centuries to enforce Russification on the Ukrainian people, forcefully removing their language and attempting to squash their culture, only to claim, well, they speak Russian, so they are Russian anyway. Historical revisionism is vital to Russian propaganda, and it will always remain at the core of it, and it was so successful in Belarus that the native Belarusian language is going to be entirely gone in a generation or two if something doesn't change. So historical revisionism, disinformation, state media, all linked together to achieve and support one entity: Vladimir Putin. This all brings us to one of the conclusions of this propaganda program, and that is to promote a positive image of Vladimir Putin and his policies. Now, I won't harp on about Putin too much because, quite frankly, Laserpig did an amazing job in his personality cult, but suffices to say, Putin's depiction as an alpha strongman able to destroy the world but benevolently choosing not to, is a hallmark of Russian propaganda. See, in reality, Russia is a broken nation living in the corpse of the Soviet Union. Outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, the country is a wreck. Its infrastructure is beyond dated, almost half the nation doesn't even live with basic necessities such as running water, and yet Putin is seen as the archetype of what a true leader is, be it through his portrayal as a masculine man riding a bear, or as a god, as a well-behaved Christian serving God for holy Russia. Both of these are carefully crafted personas that are used to distort the reality. The reality is that Putin seized power from Yeltsin in a nation completely on its knees after the fall of the Soviet Union, and after seizing power, he set about bending the weak Russian state to his will through the use of propaganda, and positioning himself as the father of the nation. While it is true that the economic situation of Russia has improved since Yeltsin, it was at tremendous cost to Russia's future, as the power of the oligarchs and the elite class, of which Putin is absolutely a part, don't buy into the lie that he destroyed the oligarchs. He is an oligarch. Due to simply raising a dire situation into a bearable position, Putin has portrayed an aura that it was he who fixed Russia. This is not unlike the efforts undertaken by Adolf H-Man, thank you YouTube for making me do that, during the interwar years, where he built the country of Germany up from the Great Depression through effectively a giant scheme of rearmament, which put the country on borrowed time and collision with either a cataclysmic collapse or war. President Kuchma attempted in a way to try this in Ukraine, as did later Yanukovych, but the Ukrainian people, to their credit, pushed back and rejected the institution of effectively a new aristocracy. Ukraine still to this day, though, struggles with the fact it inherited the core issues that Putin took advantage of when the USSR fell, oligarchs being namely one, and yes, it was an oligarch that put Volodymyr Zelensky into the presidency in Ukraine. It has taken this entire time for Zelensky and the current Ukrainian regime to push back against these oligarchs and to start implementing change to break their power up. This is the situation that faces all post-Soviet states, and it is why they are so amenable to Russian propaganda and Russian influence, because at the end of the day, Moscow holds the leash and the purse strings. In a way, the propaganda towards Putin can be seen as a rerun of the Tsardom and the absolutist rule of leaders such as Peter the Great or Catherine. The writer Durand described absolutism, and that's what I'm talking about here, is absolutism, as the advent and movement towards absolutism as an endless struggle by the sovereign to free themselves from the shackles of law, and implies that no matter how hard the ruler tries, they will never fully achieve the direct independence that they want to rule. See, when the seemingly incompetent Yeltsin resigned in 1999, it was not surprising to those inside and outside of Russia that there was in fact a president waiting in the wings. Although rule by divine right has greatly fallen out of fashion in the 21st century, the influence of religion and the control of state religion by Putin as a tool for propaganda, both internally and externally in Russia, has had a tremendous impact on solidifying and maintaining his control. An example of religion being used to fuel Russian propaganda towards the dear leader can be clearly seen in the statements of Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, who, mind you, is an appointee and buddy-buddy of Putin, and he has remained a close ally during the Russo-Ukrainian War. The Patriarch once described Putin as a miracle of God, yeah, that's a word, lauding the leader's orders to invade Ukraine to destroy, and I quote, the forces of evil. This is a key example of how Russian propaganda serves the dear leader in his efforts, and is the kind of messaging that absolutely has spread to the Western form of the culture war. And not only that, the depiction of masculinity and what it means to be a true Russian and a man by both Putin and the state, well, that is spread too. And that brings us to another point with the church. The idea that Russia is this massive holy state, that it is something to look up to if you are a good Christian. This is something that is particularly violently spread in the United States, with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene supporting the idea that Putin is a defender of Christianity because Ukraine is shutting down Russian churches. Shutting down Christian churches. Bit of a Freudian slip there, because I revealed that they are in fact Russian propaganda outlets. The Russian Orthodox Church is a propaganda outlet. It is not what we would consider like the Catholic Church or a normal Protestant chapel. It is an outlet of the state directly. There is no separation between state and church in Russia. So when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the diehards in the US who are religious turn around and call Russia a defender of Christianity, they do not know the half of it, but they are buying into that narrative that Putin is selling and that Patriarch Kirill is selling, that he is a gift from God, attempting to destroy the forces of evil, aka the globalist, aka the deep state. There is one last major talking point of Russian propaganda though, that is often forgotten, and that is of course the idea of Russia as the Great Liberator. Now, Africa. It's big. Like, really big. Like, you wouldn't actually believe how big Africa actually is. No, that is not hyperbolic. Genuinely, the size of Africa is so understated, it isn't even funny. This is the kind of map you're used to seeing, right? It shows Canada, Europe, and Russia, has these three massive blobs of Earth, and while that is true, the size of the world's continents actually looks like this. Now, look at Africa. This phenomenon is largely down to the way that the 3D Earth gets projected onto a 2D map, but nonetheless, it has contributed to the idea in people's heads that Africa isn't actually that big when compared to the Americas or Europe. In reality though, this couldn't be further from the truth. Africa can really be broken down into three major language areas though, and while on the surface what I'm saying next will sound incredibly racist and dismissive of African cultures, and will likely have an Afrikaner wanting to stab me, I have a point, so bear with me. The three regions I'm referring to in Africa are British Africa, ergo the former colonies of the British Empire, the English-speaking part of Africa; Islamic Africa, pretty self-explanatory, the former territories of the Caliphates and Ottoman Empire; and lastly, Francafrique, or French Africa. This last bit is where we're about to spend the next few minutes of your life, so be ready. But first, taking a leaf out of my Scottish friend's playbook, I'm going to give you an intermission because quite frankly, French Empire. I'm funny, okay, please laugh, please clap. But quite frankly, you have been bombarded with information for 30 minutes. So take a few minutes, get a drink, stretch, check on that girlfriend you forgot about 20 minutes ago when she asked you to do the dishes, or look at the cute kangaroos on screen. Alright, done? Yes, we are now in the French Shadow Empire, in a video about Russian propaganda. Yes, I know it sounds far-fetched, but bear with me, this will all make sense in a little bit. So this region, the Francophone-speaking region of Africa, is the former colonial possessions of the French Empire. Now, you may be wondering why I'm not including Algeria in this explanation, and it's very simple, but also incredibly complicated. The gist of the reasoning is that French Algeria was considered to be a part of the French metropole, aka continental France, and so it was treated slightly differently than just a mere colonial outpost. The Algerians in the end, though, had absolutely none of this and started shooting the French, and long story short, Algeria broke away, collapsed the French Republic at the time, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, it is now more culturally aligned with other states in Islamic Africa, and doesn't really fall into the pot of the French Shadow Empire. After the Second World War, France attempted the project of restoring its empire to pre-war levels. The reality was, though, that the Second World War had given rise to the growing voices of Africans screaming for independence and contributed to the rise of national consciousnesses in Africa. The British Prime Minister Macmillan stood up twice on a tour of Africa in the early 60s saying that the wind of change is blowing through this dark continent. Whether we like it or not, the growth of national consciousness here is a political fact. Simply put, Macmillan was stating that there were two major powers in Africa, France and Britain, and while France was pushing to keep its African empire, Britain saw it as a drain on the economy that was going to explode in national rebellions. To make it even more simple for the British, it wasn't worth it. In 1947, the Afrikaners had declared independence and set about the implementation of extremely racially divisive policies under minority Boer rule, in South Africa that is. In 1965, the semi-self-governing colony of Rhodesia too declared independence under minority rule. Through these rebellions, and of course the horrific uprisings such as that of the Mau Mau in Kenya, Britain turned its back on its African empire. The French, meanwhile, were absolutely intent on maintaining their position as the dominant European power in its corner of the continent. But they were well aware enough of the dangers of trying to be overt about it, so over time home rule was granted to these states, on the proviso that they remain in the French sphere of influence. This includes mineral deals that solely favour France's interests, the maintenance of the franc as currency, tied directly of course with the coffers of Paris, and more. Of particular note is the nations tied to France in this region of Africa, namely the Sahel, nations that have entered news lately such as Niger. They remain to this day in many ways French colonies, save for the fact they wave their own flag and sing their own anthem, but the yoke of Paris is still very much there. And that is where Russia steps in, presenting itself as the great liberator of the African people. In reality, this could not be further from the truth. In Moscow's eyes, the Africans are just useful idiots they can use to undercut the European position in Africa. Because like it or not, my German viewers, France is incredibly powerful when it comes to European security and wealth. This is why you will see reports of Wagner, Prigozhin Wagner, in these nations, taking over French bases. When the French are forced to rebellion from nations such as what happened in Niger, Russia has a vested interest in this region for its minerals and resources. Yes, that includes bodies to send to the meat grinder. Because I can tell you for a fact, Russia is recruiting Africans, quite a few. I can tell you at least 1 or 2 South Africans that I know through a mutual friend who have been killed in Russia. I can also tell you for a fact they are recruiting people in southern Africa through places like Zimbabwe, possibly Botswana. I have yet to confirm that. There are reports coming out that are very credible of many Africans being sent to Russia with the promise of a small bit of money, which in Africa would actually be quite a lot, and then dying as meat waves. There is in fact though a secret war occurring as a part of the Russo-Ukrainian war in the Sahel and across Africa and also in Sudan and other places that consist of local militias, with Ukrainian allies fighting against Wagner in Africa. Russian propaganda here is overt. It is in your face and it presents the holy liberator Russia, the freedom man against the evil French. But although we see this as overt, and if we looked at this in person, and honestly, if people cared more about Africa, they would, we wouldn't fall for it. We would see that what Russia is doing is so in your face, it's not believable. It's complete horse. Follow with an expletive. But you would fall for it. Because they're doing the same thing in the West, just through a different medium. And you can thank Otto von Bismarck for this next little gem, for giving them this idea. The culture war. Unfortunately, there was no way I could avoid this topic. No matter how much I wish I could, the culture war is a fact of modern life, and it impacts us all, unfortunately. Yes, I said unfortunately twice in the same sentence. I can't stand the culture war. Now, again, in my opinion, I believe that it is personally utter crap that is being used to make us distracted and stupid, and yet we fall for it so easily. Again, with the references to my Scottish friend Laserpig in his recent video, I don't intend to cover the topic in the way he did with a focus on the issues he focused on. Rather, I want to hone in on 3 major points and how they relate to, specifically, Russian propaganda. Masculinity, homosexuality, and last of all, religion. It's like the dark triad. I'm not going to upset anyone here, I'm sure. Recently, bear with me, I have a very big point to this next bit, and I really encourage you to listen to this next part because I think it is vital, particularly if you are a young man. Recently, Netflix released the series Adolescence, and this was immediately jumped on by the terminally online as an example of modern Hollywood forcing itself into the conversation and calling all white people bad. Particularly the likes of Elon Musk absolutely lost their mind over this series, claiming that because the main character Jamie, who was accused of murder, was a scrawny white boy, and the detective was black, that it was an attack on white people and woke nonsense. This vomiting of misinformation changed the narrative into a revisionist, see what I did there, version of what the show actually was. The show itself is an attempt to spark conversation amongst parents and teens about what it means to be a man, what it means to have emotion, respect, in both personal and sexual contexts, and to address domestic violence, showing that it can come from anywhere, even places you least expected, such as young children. It is also a critical attempt by the cast and crew to show that online radicalization is genuinely a threat to young people, who, to quote one of the actresses, just want to find somewhere to fit in. In fact, during one of the episodes of this show, they're at a high school and they show a boy who is about 13 and clearly impacted by the online alpha chads on how to present himself as a true Sigma alpha and get all the girls by tricking them. Because apparently you can't get a girlfriend unless you trick them, because girls only go for 20% of all men. That's not true. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. The reception of this show in the United Kingdom, where it was actually made, not in Hollywood in the United States, has been very positive, and it will be used in future to teach young people about the dangers of radicalization online. Now, as a father of 2 boys, it has reinforced my fear of how dangerous the online world can be, and I genuinely encourage everyone to watch this. This is not a paid ad by Netflix, I just think it's a very well-made show. But why bring up a Netflix show? Well, because it made the point of young people wanting to fit in, and it set off the regular group of people who scream bloody murder every time they are questioned. It is the same regular group of people who push the narratives that parrot Moscow. Remember how I said in Africa, Russia relies on overt propaganda to show the evil French and the Russian liberator. Now let's apply that here. The evil is the woke media using shows like Adolescence to make men, particularly white men, seem evil and take away our masculinity. Now, what happens when you remove something so vital as masculinity? Well, a young man's sense of self-worth and sense of belonging, they're gone, and the young man will look elsewhere for it. Say they go looking in their reels, they go looking online, they go to chat boards, they go to places like Kiwi Farms, Reddit, you name it. 4chan was the big one until, it had a bit of a moment. I'm hoping it doesn't come back. And they will find things like this. These are strong men singing deeply in uniform as one. They fit in together. They speak the young man's language. They feed into that Russian ideal of the strong man who, through struggle, makes it through life as a paragon of masculinity. A man where women know their place around him. They listen to him. He has a circle of friends where he fits in, and he serves a masculine, strong leader. The kind of man who rides a bear. And well, young people just want to fit in. Little Timmy here, feeling isolated from school, has just taken his first steps into radicalization and falling into the trap of Russian propaganda. But remember what I said. The best propaganda comes from partial truths. And it gets worse because as this young man recoils from the woke progressive parents that he has, in reality these parents just believe everyone is equal, he looks for a return to traditional values, where he as a man deserves a traditional wife, traditional values and such, and then he gets force-fed reels and content like this.
If marrying a Russian girl was a mistake, she works out all the time and it's shaming me. I've been trying really hard to get her up to...
And this. And now you can see a normal, well-adjusted young boy has fallen into the open door that is the dark path to radicalization. He will then search and look for content that will more and more match his worldview. Content such as Aiden, whose small appendages aside, propagate the notion of a strong man who is smart and supports the truth. They will look at things like Rogan, who platforms people to perpetuate insane theories ranging from Ukraine being full of biolabs to the pyramids are actually generators. And the more they go into the rabbit hole, the worse it gets. The deeper and deeper they go, and the less insane things start to sound. They will look for things like toxic feminists, and yeah, they absolutely exist, who will turn around and say all men are evil, all men are bad, and it will reinforce his worldview that the only allies he has are other men, that the only allies he has are these people like Rogan, the only allies he has are people like Musk, and then they'll buy into it more and more. Oh, that show Adolescence isn't about me, I'm not one of those people, they just hate me because I'm white, and it keeps going. We used to call these kind of people 9/11 truthers, people who genuinely believe George Bush and the deep state knocked down the Twin Towers. But now these theories sound sane to these people. They're repeated at the highest levels of political power and social power. The government, the deep state, controls everything. They control our life. They're trying to destroy us. They're trying to kill us all. Russia uses this kind of radicalization more than you think it does, and it works on people. Hell, it worked on me through osmosis when I was in a relationship with a Russian woman. I, at 17, began to believe the lies about the decadent gay West, and that the uber mega chad traditional Russia was the future, because as the TV show said, I was a kid. I just wanted to fit in. And this is where Russian propaganda is arguably at its strongest. It has the ability to adjust so quickly while using the same formula, be it in the West or be it in Africa, with anti-European propaganda. It follows a simple process. Find a group to target, give them the enemy, give them an alternative, discredit the enemy, disown the enemy, dehumanize the enemy, rewrite the enemy's history, and well, you can guess what happens next. This is a tactic called active measures, and it works terrifyingly well. You could have another Australian animal moment to take that all in. Pause if you need to, because this ride is not over yet, and it's probably only going to get worse before it gets better. There is going to be a group of people who played that one modern COD Black Ops game pointing at the screen like Leonardo DiCaprio right now with the words active measures, but strap in because we're off to the races. The term itself has its birth in the 1920s and refers to the actions undertaken by the Soviet state within the realm of political warfare. Initially across Eastern Europe and the territories of the former Russian Empire in the wake of the revolution, such as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and such. The scope and scale of such active measures though do vary, and not every tactic will be employed by the Kremlin to achieve a goal. Active measures include, but are not limited to, propaganda and disinformation. This is the beginning, where we are sitting now, by spreading false or misleading information to a nation's population through alternative media sources, influencers, newspapers, unions, and such. The Kremlin is able to influence public opinion and undermine the target country's political standing and stability. This is often undertaken by agents of influence, aka the useful idiots. Spoke about these before already. These are the spokes on the bicycle wheel, so to speak. People such as Tim Pool, whether he's a useful idiot or not, he falls into this category. He was engaged as an individual within a target country to promote an agenda. Pool regularly promoted anti-Ukrainian rhetoric almost word for word from official state-run Russian media to his large audience of predominantly American men.
But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
Individuals, though, are not the only ones, because agents of influence are often used, and again, I should clarify, Tim Pool has claimed he was completely unaware of the event that was taking place, and that he was a complete victim in this entire thing. And because he is claiming that, and I am sharing that with you, I am protecting myself from being sued because I'm not accusing him of being a paid Russian agent, I'm just saying he's a useful idiot. Now, individual agents of influence, well, they lead to front organizations. This is the act of creating seemingly independent organizations to promote the agenda of the active measures operators, and it generally brings together agents of influence. To use Beanie Man as an example again, his media organization was a front organization for Russian influence. But make no mistake, it is not alone. If one were to follow the money of other extremist groups such as Alternative for Germany, or AfD, the political party, it will find direct connections with the Kremlin, and yet again it parrots the exact same talking points. Russia set up a front organization in Ukraine that has been taken down, and that is none other than the Russian Orthodox Church. These are examples of useful idiots being coalesced together with the goal of furthering misinformation. These groups are then often used in the next step, sabotage. Now, when people think sabotage, they tend to think of terrorism, through the attacking of infrastructure, and yes, that can be the case, but in the modern era, this can also mean political stability, economy, and of course public discourse, attacking these ultimately leading to the manipulation of events. All of these factors work together with one desired outcome, the orchestrating or influencing of a political event such as a protest, revolution, or the outcome of an election. Now let's look at an example. The 2016 and 2024 United States presidential elections. But first, to interject here, I am not claiming that the President of the United States is a Russian spy, although his actions do leave me wondering sometimes. I am not prepared to make that claim as, quite frankly, there is no concrete proof. Furthermore, I understand the choice of Americans in voting red instead of blue, because just like Australians, you vote in many ways against the continuation of Democrat policies. I do not believe it is fair or just to call the entirety of the United States Russian spies or stupid for doing it. The reality is, for all the online filibuster and rhetoric, many voters still vote based on single issues. They do not vote based on what is going on in Ukraine or Palestine. Voters generally vote on local problems. This was explicitly highlighted in Australia in early May with our elections, and for that reason, please do not take what I am saying next as a continuation of the Trump spy clickbait title. It is not. I am not saying Donald Trump is a Russian spy. I will also add the majority of people who do vote in elections do so because they are doing it based on, like I said, local issues or single issues. Most people are not terminally online. The people you meet online screaming about politics are quite often in the minority, not the majority of people. If you were to go onto Facebook during the Australian run-up to our election last fortnight or so, you would see predominantly the idea that the country was going to vote Liberal, or the Coalition, our Conservative Party. Liberal is the Conservative Party in Australia, for those who aren't aware. In reality, it was the largest Labour or left-wing victory in Australian history for politics, in terms of just the size and scope of a second term. So again, I am not saying that he is a Russian spy. That is part of the online narrative that I will not be continuing. And for the 30 people who didn't clearly listen to the last 2 minutes of me saying, or lack the ability to think critically when I say that I'm not calling him a spy, go ahead, call me woke, TDS, cuckold, or whatever it is you kids say in the comments. Most creative one of yous, I'll send you a Tim Tam wrapped up in a little basket. But that said, active measures have been used by Russia to interfere in foreign elections. Repeatedly. They also orchestrate domestic unrest and spread disinformation campaigns. For example, Russia's interference in the 2016 US presidential election was a prime example of the use of active measures, including a hacking campaign, the spread of misinformation through social media and other platforms, and more. This was explicitly clear on social media such as Facebook and Twitter during the 2024 cycle, where large groups of bots repeated the same talking lines over and over again in order to spread information in critical areas where the Republican Party required votes, while actively suppressing fact. This misinformation campaign regarding Haitian immigrants in Cleveland, Ohio is a prime example of this, with agents of influence such as Elon Musk, because yes, Elon Musk is nothing more than a useful idiot, perpetuating the idea that Haitian immigrants were eating cats and stealing pets. Similarly, photos were shared of totally disconnected events to back up effectively what was being said here, while fact-checking was lauded as fake news and again, deep state woke lies. Again, I'm not saying this is due to Trump being a spy, but the reality is Russia has and will continue to benefit from a Trump presidency over a Harris presidency, particularly in Ukraine. We can see this clearly with Trump himself repeating Kremlin rhetoric regarding Ukraine and his dismissiveness of Ukrainian institutions, elected officials, and also the Ukrainians' respect for their own constitution. I'd like to bring up the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky is still the president of Ukraine well after his term ended. The Ukrainian constitution forbids elections during wartime. It forbids them for multiple reasons, namely, one, the people in occupied areas, because it was always going to be assumed there would be occupied areas, would not be able to give their voice to any election. That is one reason. The second is it is too dangerous to hold an election, both politically and to the people, because the people can be targeted, and Russia has shown that it will happily target civilians, and also politically because it could be the victim of a misinformation campaign, it could be the victim of mass cyber attacks, it could be the victim of multiple other instances where the country and the state would no longer be able to run a fair and safe election, and it could lead to, well, a puppet like Yanukovych being put back on charge. Trump is very critical of Ukrainian rhetoric and has flat out called Zelensky effectively a fake president. Meanwhile, he will be completely fine when he calls the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, the rightful president of Russia, even though according to the Russian constitution, anyone who has held a foreign citizen's card or residency card can't legally be a president of the Russian Federation. Vladimir Putin held an East German residency card. By his own constitution, he can't legally be the president of Russia. Not that it matters, because he just changes the constitution to be president again whenever he wants to anyway. But you see my point. He is critical of one and not the other. This is active measures at play. This is the President of the United States, whether he realizes it or not, being an agent of influence, being a useful idiot for the Kremlin. Russia tried this again in Germany with its most recent election, with the AfD reaching the position of the second largest party in the Bundestag, but failing to achieve a majority and being kept out of power by a coalition between the SPD and the CDU. These are not uncommon events, and no matter who you are, teenager or president, you are not immune to propaganda. It has happened in every state, in the West mostly. The Brexit campaigning, for one, there is so many levels to go into that. When you look at Australia, our most recent election was absolutely influenced by forces outside of our nation and outside of our sovereign territory. You mean to tell me that before the election, extremely extremist pundits, and yeah, I'm aware I said extremely 3 times, sue me, were given larger platforms and larger voices. They were given that ability to get louder, to screech more, to say more, and the more and more you hear it, the easier it is to believe. If you control the narrative, you control the next part of the conversation. If you control the conversation now, you can control history. If you control history and the conversation now, you control everything. Like I said, the best propaganda has truth at its core. Where we're talking about young men and their loss of masculinity, that is absolutely a large problem in modern society. Young men have lost a lot of their self-worth, be that from extremely toxic femininity, which is a genuine problem, be it from the fact that as gender roles have changed throughout history and throughout the modern era, men have found themselves unable to fit in certain areas, particularly in more rural places. Like where I grew up, it was very hard to find a place where I fit in because I'm not overtly sporty, even though I do quite enjoy my sport. I don't play it to the same level as others. I'm more of a book nut, so because of that, it was hard to fit in. It was very difficult to find a place where I could develop as a man with my own ideals and my own beliefs. For me, that was as a naval cadet, as a part of a team. I found somewhere to fit in, somewhere to believe in, something to do. But for so many young men, that only place they can find to fit in is online. And when they click onto online sources, they find things like that video I showed you, like about Sigma Boy, like look at my Russian girlfriend, things like that. This is a genuine problem, but it is rooted in some truth, and that's where people like Tate and other extremist online influencers and other so-called alpha chads will turn around, grab onto that notion, grab onto the guy at their weakest point and say, no, you can believe in this, you can get everything you want. This is a genuine issue, but it is rooted in truth and it is grabbed onto. Russian propaganda at its core will not start campaigns such as this. They will find the problem. They will find that string that is weak in society and they will pull. And they will keep pulling and keep pulling. Immigration, for one. Russia would have you believe that it is a strong country that protects its borders, while at the same time bringing in untold countless immigrants from North Korea, from China, from Africa, and Central Asia to work in its cheap and crappy jobs, and then to force them through the Belarusian border to create an immigration problem in Europe. Does this particularly at the Polish border. This is a genuine thing that Russia does. It will also then portray itself as a holy nation, as an example of Christian faith, while also having one of the highest abortion rates. Now, I'm not saying abortion is wrong. I am saying, though, that you can't proclaim yourself to be the paragon of Christian virtue to people who are so anti-abortion they picket in front of abortion clinics in the United States, and then have them support you as a paragon of Christian virtue while you were doing things like this. Russia has one of the highest domestic violence rates in the world. Well, it did until it legalized domestic violence against women. It's a genuine problem. I can tell you, and most people who know a Russian woman can tell you, they don't consider things like being slapped occasionally as domestic violence because it's so common. Because why would it be domestic violence? It's completely normal to be put in my place. That's the kind of mentality that state enforces. So again, it's not about making up a lie and making you believe it. It's about finding that string, pulling that string, and as things get crazier and crazier and crazier, you'll start to believe more. And they'll get you to the point where you believe that the war in Ukraine, for example, is made up. That it is completely made up by the deep state to steal your money to bring in immigrants as part of a global conspiracy to money launder. Still yet trying to figure out how you can money launder a tank, but we'll get to that one day, I'm sure. That is Russian propaganda. And this is the longest video I've ever made. And that was a journey. And for those who made it, thank you. For those who didn't, well, you can't hear me, but I guess we can send a search party. Like, comment, subscribe, join the Discord. If you liked it, consider joining my Patreon. I will upload there first, usually a day or two. And I will catch you all next time. Really, seriously, thank you to everyone who made it all the way to the end here. I've been wanting to make this video for a very, very long time. And I've never really made a video this long, so it's kind of entering uncharted territory for me. So thank you all so much, particularly those who watched all the way through. And yeah, I don't know what to say other than thank you for all the support. I will catch you all in a bit with something shorter and something more enjoyable.